Well, good morning. You'd open your Bibles to Psalm 36 rather. Psalm 36 is where we're going to begin in just a minute. This morning, I want to talk about the wrestling with our thoughts. We're talking about this year the idea or the desire to walk in a worthy manner. And there are things that stop us. And a lot of times the things that stop us are in our own mind. And the struggle that we can have of what the things that we think of, the things that we focus on, the things we allow in. And it can stop us from being worthy, or at least living the worthy life as we're supposed to be, or as we're called to be. And this morning, I'd like to start by talking about that part of things for us. What does this look like in your own mind? It's amazing how often this can occur. There's various ways that you've heard this. Flattery can get you nowhere. Psalm 36, though, tells us flattery can get us somewhere. And the amazing thing is that we're flattering ourselves in Psalm 36. It's not about flattering somebody else. It's a whole other conversation. In Psalm 36, you have this psalm about the wickedness of humanity and the goodness of God. And beginning in verse 1, he says, "Wrongdoing speaks to the ungodly within his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes, for it flatters him in his own eyes concerning the discovery of his wrongful deed and the hatred of it. The words of his mouth are wickedness and deceit. He has ceased to be wise and to do good." And he'll continue on here, but that's as far as I'm going to read this morning. I want you to think about that. I can flatter myself so much that the bad or the evil things that I think of or that I do don't even bother me, aren't even of concern to me. How often this happens, that we can see the sin or the problems of other people, and as Jesus would say, you have your own log sticking out of your own eye. But we've justified so much that in Psalm 36, as we just read, David says you can flatter yourself. You can deceive yourself. One of the hardest things as we talk about this is being able to see this in ourselves. So I want you to stop for just a minute. This is not one of those sermons that you're glad somebody else is here to hear. This is for you. In the moment that you think, I don't need this, this is for you. This is a subject that we all at least need to make sure that we have under control, or that we're always thinking of, and that we're always considering our own selves to make sure that we are right with God. As I said, seeing this in other people, that's easy. We're really good at that. Seeing it in ourselves can be very difficult. I want you to notice in Matthew, the 26th chapter, Peter struggled with this. So flattery can be certainly on one side, this idea that I'm sinning, but it's not that big of a deal. It's not a big deal. The other side of this can be that I view myself, as 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter will say, that I just won't take heed lest I fall. I think that I would never do something, and that's exactly what I fall for, because I am not willing to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so you see this here with Peter. Peter had no doubt in his mind that he would never deny Jesus. Never. He says it. I will never do that. I want you to notice what he says in verse 33. When you talk about Peter, this is Jesus explaining what's going to happen. In verse 32, he says, "And all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another, just as the shepherd separates the sheep." Or excuse me, that's 25. That's a really good verse too. But over in 33 of 26, Jesus is talking. He says, "You will all fall away because of me in this sight," in verse 31. "For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." But Peter replied to him, "Even if they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus says to him, "Truly I say to you that this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said to him, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." All the disciples said the same things as well. Even if all of these guys do this, James, John, doesn't matter, any of the other apostles, if they all do it, Jesus, I would never do that. You're going to do this to me tonight, Peter. I would die for you, Jesus. That would never happen. the minute that you close the door to thinking that you cannot fall into the sin, you better take heed lest you fall. As soon as you put the guard down. Self-deception is a dangerous, dangerous thing. And Satan knows it is. It is amazing how often people can deceive themselves, and the next thing you look up and a rooster's crowing, and you denied him 3 times. Not only did he deny him, he cursed him. Think about how far Peter had gone. Peter, I would die for you, Jesus. All the other apostles will do this. I would never do this. All right. Satan's going to sift you like wheat. And if it can happen to Peter, it can happen to anybody. As soon as we let our guard down, as soon as we see Jesus being taken away from us, or we view that God is far away from us when he's not, and we're on our own, what happens? There's a temptation, at least, to let your light not shine as bright as it should. The self-deception can happen so quickly. We need to be willing to listen to what people tell us. If people are telling you, you have a little bit of an issue with this, and your response is, nuh-uh, there might be an issue. When people that love you tell you something, you're struggling with this, don't get mad, listen. It doesn't necessarily mean they're right, but it's something you need to listen to. Don't write it off simply because you don't think at that particular moment that you are struggling with something. Proverbs, the 15th chapter, beginning in verse 31, he says, one whose ear listens to a life-giving rebuke will stay among the wise. One who neglects discipline rejects himself, but one who listens to the rebuke acquires understanding. I love 31. Life-giving rebuke. Those words should not be together. I'm being rebuked. Why? Because it's going to save your life. When we're talking about today, certainly could save you physically, but I'm talking from a spiritual standpoint. It will save your life. You've got to be willing to listen to those who are not simply yes men, as we would call them, but people that will absolutely tell you the truth. You are struggling with this. You can get mad, you can kick them out, you can do whatever you want, or you can listen to them. Consider what's being said. Make sure that you're not struggling with those things. And if you are, understand that it's life-giving rebuke. They're trying to help you. We live in a time where love all of a sudden becomes this idea that I'm just going to let you do what you want to do. That is not love. That's hate as far as I'm concerned. Love is where you are willing to bring somebody to Jesus Christ and show them life-giving rebuke. You're going to save them from jumping off the cliff. You're going to help them. Is that easy? No. No. Is it love? Yes. We've got to understand how quickly we can deceive ourselves, how quickly we can allow other people that are trying to help us to remove them from the situation and not listen to those that are trying to help us walk this worthy life. Deceiving ourselves. In James, the 1st chapter, James, we'll mention this a couple of times in James chapter 1. And this normally isn't the part that we focus on these verses, but we will today. In James 1, beginning in verse 22, it says, but prove yourselves doers of the word and not just hearers who deceive themselves. How do you deceive yourselves? I want you to think about this, children of God. People are hearers of the word, and they deceive themselves by thinking that they're doers of the word. You know how often that occurs? People know what the scriptures say. That's not an issue. Living it can be an issue. And we can deceive ourselves so quickly. Of course I'm living it. And then when somebody points it out to you, why do you keep posting about these things? Why do you keep talking about these things? Well, that's their problem. They're denying it. No. You're denying it. You're deceived into thinking that you believe that God is in ultimate control, and you don't, based on your actions. Don't deceive yourself. There's a reason why the scriptures will use that word. Do not deceive yourself. Bad company corrupts good morals. Why? Because I want to go hang out with whoever I want to hang out with. I will change them. No. Bad company will corrupt good morals. Do not be deceived. There are people that are hearers of the word, and they're not doers. Don't deceive yourself. He goes on in verse 26. If anyone thinks himself to be religious, yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this person's religion is worthless. James kicks it up a notch. People that think they're religious, people that sit in church buildings, people that partake of the Lord's Supper, sing, pray, all the different aspects of it, but are not willing to control their own tongue, and by definition control the things that we do. Your religion is worthless, it says. I'm not sugarcoating that whatsoever, and neither was James. It's worthless. What's the problem, though? We deceive ourselves. My religion isn't worthless. In 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, one of the most amazing passages to me, and many of you will know this, is where Paul will say, you can give your body up to be a martyr. You can die for Jesus Christ. Die for him. And if you do not have love, what is it? Worthless. It means nothing. You give your life. If you don't have love, it means nothing. How powerful is that? How much of a deception do you have to be under to be willing to give your life for Jesus Christ and not give it because you, in a worthy manner, because you don't have love? You're not living for him. And I'm going to tell you, the danger of this is all the time. It may not be from a physical death, but there are people that give up things in this life just simply because it's a checklist, rather than because I love Jesus, I love God. We've got to understand how quickly we can deceive ourselves. If you say things, and I'll just put these up quickly, I don't have a problem with this, it's really no big deal. I'm not as bad as most, which is always dangerous. I can quit anytime I want to. This is just the way that I am. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you. I can quit at any time is a great abuser's addictor, somebody who's addicted to something, great line. I can quit any time. Okay, now's the time. Quit. But we deceive ourselves into actually thinking that you can. You think you can. I'm not as bad as anyone else. If we compare ourselves to other people, there's nobody that's going to be saved. This isn't about me, as I would say, being the valedictorian at West Mason. It's not about that. It's about my relationship with Jesus Christ. It's about your relationship with him. And whether or not we truly have that kind of relationship with him. It's about true transformation. True transformation. I want you to think about some of the things that we can get so caught up in our thoughts. Over in Proverbs, the 4th chapter, excuse me, Proverbs, the 4th chapter, this battlefield that is going on, I'm afraid sometimes people don't even know what's happening. Satan is after you. He wants you. And the danger so often is Christians view this to be peacetime. It's peacetime. Now, we look at our country and we're like, well, it's definitely not peacetime. It's never been peacetime. It's never been peacetime. When it comes to the battle that's going on, we can have peace in the midst of the battle with God, but it's not peacetime. In Proverbs, the 4th chapter, in verse 23, he says, watch over your heart with diligence, all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. With all diligence. Again, there's reasons for words. With all diligence. Why? Because that is what Satan is after. If you do not watch your heart, if you do not watch the battle that is going on, you will lose. You will lose. I'm going to tell you, and I've said this before, and I want to make sure that you understand this. Satan will win if it's just against you. I want you to understand that. He will win if it's just against you. If it's you and God, he has no chance. No shot. But if it's just you, you have no shot. Understand the enemy. How powerful he is. But never forget how powerful your Father is. It's a battlefield. When we have a relationship with God, when we draw near to him, not just simply read those words, but actually do it, Satan will flee from us. If we just talk about drawing near to him, we're deceiving ourselves. And Satan is right there. We've got to understand what this battlefield is. Over in 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, verse 4. I want you to notice here in context. So verse 5 is where we're going to be going to, and it's such a powerful passage. I'll start in verse 3. When we talk about this transformation, this battlefield, Paul says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not wage battle according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying arguments and all arrogance raised against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ." I'm going to stop there. Verse 5, you got to take every thought captive. How do I take every thought captive? That doesn't mean that there's not going to be things that pop into your head. What it does mean is that as soon as they pop into your head, you take them captive. I'm not going to focus on them. The key is in verse 4. How can we possibly do that? Because it's divinely powerful. Because God is with you. That's how we do it. It's divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We understand his power. And then he tells us, I want you to take every thought captive. Every thought captive. I want you to be mindful. Be diligent. Don't deceive yourself. Being understanding how you are to do these things. Why you are to do these things. Because it's a battlefield in your mind. And Satan has surrounded us with things that are going to fill our minds. And we allow it to fill our minds. We allow him. We've got to understand how powerful the things that are around us are. How easy we are influenced and how quickly we deceive ourselves into thinking that we're not. It is amazing. All you have to do is watch the news for a little while, and you can see what kind of influence it'll have on you. And I assure you it's not positive. We've got to understand how powerful the influences are. But we also need to understand how powerful our God is and how powerful or how much control we have if we're willing to do it. There will be things that come into your head. What do you do with them? Do you give them to God? Do you what if them down the street? Do you allow them to focus? You're going to focus on them for the rest of the day? And I'm talking about bad things. There are bad things that happen. And there are bad things that come into our minds. What are we going to do with those things? Take every thought captive. It doesn't mean that you don't believe that those things are happening or you deny them. What it does mean is that you understand how powerful your God is. You trust him. And you're going to be willing to go through those things just like Paul is talking about here. We're ready to be punished. We're ready to punish all disobedience whenever your obedience is completed, he goes on and talks about. We're ready. Earlier on, he was talking about the struggles that he was going to go through, the difficulties that come up. But it's amazing how often we can poison our own mind. There are people that are just negative to the nth degree on every single thing. Everything. I'm not talking about, there aren't bad things that are going on. There are. There certainly are. But if you're a child of the living God, pessimism is an issue. Is a stumbling block. How can you rejoice when you go through various trials if your whole perspective is negative? You can't. It's the understanding of who our God is and how powerful he is. Anxiety, and I'm not talking about anxiety that is a chemical issue. I'm not talking about the things that people struggle with from that standpoint down that road. I'm talking about the anxiety that we bring on ourselves because we do not believe that God is in control. And I'm not talking about people that will say that he's in control. I mean that he's not in control by your actions. You don't believe it. And there are a lot of people that fall into that category. Bitterness will absolutely destroy you. It's not going to do anything to the other person, That other person, whoever did these things to you, they're going to have to deal with other things. But the bitterness itself is a cancer to you. It will destroy you. And criticism. Brethren, you know this very, very well. We are surrounded in this world by criticism. There are critics everywhere. Let it not be said of us at the church. That's why we're different. Biting and devouring one another cannot be done. Making sure that we have the right attitude towards one another, encouraging one another, even in our rebukes of one another, that is done in love, and understanding it's life-changing or life-giving in the things that we are doing. People are going to say about themselves, I am not good enough. I will always fail. My life doesn't matter. No one really cares. God could never love me. People believe those things. People sitting in church buildings believe those things. And it's foolish to think that there's not people here that do not believe those things, or at least think those things. I want you to understand the poison that you are allowing into your mind. We've talked about this being in a worthy manner, walking in a worthy manner. As we've said many times, it's not because I am so good that I'm walking in a worthy manner. It is because of the grace of God. It is because of Him that He makes me worthy. Over in Romans, the 12th chapter, when he talks about being not conformed to the world, and certainly there are powerful points to be made of that. We're not striving to be like that. We're supposed to be different. But I want you to notice the second part of verse 2. It says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Transformed by the renewing of your mind. Total transformation. Metamorphosis. Total transformation. By what? The renewing of your mind. That you understand that I am a child of the living God. And that because of the things that I have done in my past, He was willing to die for those things. And I'm not going to be defined by those things. I'm going to allow myself to be defined by being a child of God. Ephesians, the 4th chapter, verse 23, talks about this renewing of your mind, and it's a day-by-day basis. It's a constant effort because we are bombarded by things that tell us that we're not good enough. Your God, your Father, tells you you are absolutely good enough. I'd like to close by looking at Colossians, the 3rd chapter. And again, this is just an overview of some of the things we're going to be talking about. But this is how it begins. It's not just about hearing it. You all are hearing it. It's about doing it. Colossians, the 3rd chapter, Paul begins in verse 1 by saying, therefore, if you have been raised with Christ, keep seeking the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on the things that are above, not on the things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with Him in glory. Amazing verses. Set your minds on things above, not on the things on earth. You stop right there. How long does it take us to get past verse 2? How long do we focus on the things of this earth rather than the things of Him? There are things in this world we have to think about. Nobody's talking about that. Focus on them. That we set our minds on them rather than the things above. People will never get to verse 4 if you can't do that. He's not your life if you're not willing to set your minds on things above. It cannot be any easier said than that. The problem is acting on it, living it in my day-to-day life. He'll go on and explain a little bit what this looks like. You're not caught up in anger, slander, obscene speech, all the different things that are mentioned here that people get caught up in. But you know what these people may have been saying? I'm a Christian. No, you're not. You're sons of disobedience, he calls them. You're not living for God. In verse 12 and following, he talks about the things that those that are chosen, those that are walking in a manner that are worthy, are living. They have compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, bearing with one another, forgiving each other. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so must you do also. That's not because I'm happy all the time that people are doing things against me. But this is what a child of God is. We're compassionate people. Even to people that don't deserve compassion in the world's view. We're compassionate people. We're kind, even when somebody's not being kind to me. And I am willing to forgive. What does he say here? When there's a complaint against somebody, what's that mean? They did something to me. And I'm willing to forgive. Why? Because my Savior was willing to forgive me. In verse 16, he says, let the word of Christ richly dwell within you with all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness in your hearts to God. This is one of those verses the Church of Christ folks get so focused on, and we think, boom, instrumental music verse. No. Let the word of God richly dwell within you. Don't miss the point of the verse. You can make application of it to other things, certainly. But the point of the verse is not, well, we don't have instruments. The point is, you can sing a cappella, and you can sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, but if you don't let it dwell in your hearts, it's nothing. Are we allowing it to richly dwell within us? Do we focus on the things that we are doing? In verse 17 and verse 23, anytime you see the words, whatever you do, are highly important. Whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. In verse 23, whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord and not for people, knowing that it is from the Lord that you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord whom you serve. He is my life. He is the one who sets me apart, who allows me to walk in a worthy manner, who allows me to walk in his light. We talk about shining bright. The danger so often to me is that just stays inside the huddle. In here. Shine bright every single moment of your life. Be diligent to watch the battlefield of your heart, because Satan is not going to he's not going to stop. We can stop him. But until we do that, until we have the armor on, until we're doing the things that we need to do to bring God close to us and have that relationship with him, Satan, I assure you, is not going to stop. And it takes all of us as a congregation at West Mason to do these things, to keep him out. You are worthy, not because of the things that you've done. You're worthy because God said you're worthy. Your life has meaning because God says your life has meaning. Not because of what the world says. It's about our relationship with him. I know that there are some that struggle with this. I'm begging you to let us help you. Because I assure you, you're not alone in dealing with these things. People have dealt with them in the past, still are dealing with them. Let us help you. If you have not obeyed the gospel, now's the time. I've always said, and it's amazing to me how often people go through the things in this life, and there's horrible things that happen in this life. Without God, I cannot imagine that. I cannot imagine that. I have peace because of him. Not because I don't understand the things that are going on. I know what's going on. And if I didn't have God, I'd be madder than anything. But with God, I understand peace. I understand it. If you don't have that, let us help you. Let me introduce him to you. Make sure that you're praying for one another, as always. This cannot just be the simple thing that we always say at the end of a sermon either. Pray for one another. Remember one another. But if there's anything that we can do for you right now, I ask you to please come as we stand and sing.